ways we looked at it initially was what would the normal boundaries would be. County boundaries, city boundaries, or the normal boundaries that you would look at first. How does that fit? If we did it on a county boundary basis, we looked at how that would fit related to the amount of the transit that we did initially. How would that convert over to how many people would use it? I mean, are you going to encompass a lot of people in those areas that would not have an opportunity to use the transit? So what would be their interest and what would be their support for a taxing authority within the county on that basis? We looked at it within cities. And looking at municipalities, if you have municipalities that are going to vote in or out for that, you run the risk of certain municipalities in and of themselves voting no. And yet the transit is going to run through their jurisdiction. Now you're going to take it through their town, and they're not going to have stops, they're not going to have any benefits of that, and yet you're still going to run it through there. How's that going to work out? And how much participation do you get from them in trying to make the thing work? After looking at all that and looking at the ACOG work that had been done related to an urbanized area, we kind of looked at it, took that and ran with that to say, okay, if we're going to take urbanized area data, that's going to look at the density of the population within the region and the density of the employment within the region. When you looked at those and put those on top of each other, it kind of gave you a fairly concise area of where the population was dense enough and the employment was dense enough that those people could take advantage of transit. Whether that be expansion of bus transit, expansion or creating the commuter rail, modern streetcar, whatever mode you wanted to put out there, there was enough density and possibility of use that those people would have an interest in it. They've got a dog in the hunt. So if you could get them within a boundary and ask them to vote in favor of or not in favor of something, we felt like the opportunities were much greater to have a successful vote. Then the issue came down to how do you structure those boundaries. It was nice smooth boundaries when you looked at the urbanized area data that they put together. You computerize that and it looks nice and smooth, but how do you get that to a jurisdictional basis that doesn't create problems? And when you start trying to do that, the issue comes down to votes. The last thing you want to do is split the precincts. Because when you start doing that, trying to determine who's going to be in the precinct, who's going to get the vote for that within the precinct, who's not, gets real difficult. So ACOG was kind enough to go through that exercise in which we came up with the map that actually shows, I think there's in there, in here, is it on okay. Which shows from the basis of precincts what it might look like. Granted that's going to exclude some areas within some communities, some towns. Norman, for example, the far eastern part of the city would be excluded, and yet the far eastern part of the county, or excuse me, of the city, probably would have less need for that transit initially, and it would be harder for us to provide that enhancement to their transit at the start. Now we all understand that whatever recommendation that we make is always subject to change in the future, because as you expand your transit footprint, you're going to have more people that are going to have the capability of taking advantage of it, and you're going to have to go through the expansion of that transit authority's boundaries. But at the start, we're trying to come up with what is going to be the best opportunity, what's going to give us the most opportunity to have a successful authority voted on. In the opinion of the Governors Committee and that was submitted to RTD 1, same stuff we're looking at now, we kind of came to the conclusion that the precinct jurisdictional or boundary model for the urbanized area was the best way to go.
That's population.
That's the population one, and there's a separate one on.
And then that, if you can see these little green things, those are the precincts, so it matches up pretty well with where the density is. And then that's employment.
That's the employment density. Which again, yeah, trying to put those on top of each other, and it kind of comes up to a fairly easy way to look at it from a density standpoint. We understand too that if you're going to do precincts and you set that out, that's all subject to change in the future. As we have a new census, precincts will change, most always they do. As you expand boundaries, eventually you may have to expand that farther out. but we want to come up with what should be, or what we feel like is the best chance we have to get this done the first time around. And that seemed to be the one that everybody liked. It was the one that the committee agreed to recommend to the steering committee as what we felt like is the best option. We didn't go in with an idea of the others not working, it's just try to come up with which one's best. And we felt like that one was the best one at this time. Questions, discussion, comments?
We discussed whether or not these positions should be elected or appointed. You want to get into that?
Sure. That was the next discussion was the trustees of an authority, if you have one put in place. What's going to be the best way to do that? Again, we drew heavily from the work done in RTD 1 and the governance and finance committees of that particular effort. Trying to come up with the number of trustees it would take to properly represent the population within that boundary. A 9-member model, we looked at anywhere from 5, 7, 9, 11 member models to try to figure out which ones work the best. We kind of came down to the 9-member model, which would be create. Now this is a member model that is you could, if you want to do votes, you could do votes, but votes are difficult.
You might mention that we split the district into the sub-districts.
Well,
So, yeah,
yes,
so
we looked at
more of that,
sub-districts.
yeah.
Initially thinking about if we voted, but voting is expensive to have votes. What would jurisdiction would be able to vote within that? Who pays for the election itself? Just felt like that was about going through election. That may be a little bit beyond the purpose of a trustee basis. So we looked at appointments as being the best way to do it. We also felt like that the appointments should come from within the district. There was some discussion at one time about the governor being involved in appointing some trustees in some of these other jurisdictions. But the people within the district are the ones that should be represented, so that the governance should come from within the district. If we're going to do that, then we tried to break the total down into individual districts that most represent the population fairly. In this particular case, we ended up with 9 districts within the authority boundaries. And those districts then were determined to a large degree upon the amount of population within each district, and to make sure that as much as possible, the smaller municipalities within each of those districts would have a way to help determine who the appointed trustee from that district would be. There's only, I guess, 2 other districts within the 9 proposed districts in this model, Edmond and Norman, that would have a majority.
Midwest City?
Yeah, well, Midwest City, yeah, they do too. Midwest City on theirs. Otherwise, Oklahoma City is the majority city of population within the districts. But in looking at that, there was a model that was set up to determine how those individual trustees would be appointed, which would give some veto power to the smaller municipalities within each one of those districts. It gives them a say-so as to how that would happen. We're trying to come up with a proposal that was as simple as possible. You have something that's a little complicated, and we want to keep it as simple as possible going forward. We looked at a couple of possibilities where we'd actually increase it to 11 trustees that would include a couple of at-large positions that would kind of roll from appointment to appointment as to which of the smaller municipalities would have control over those appointments.
Tom,
It got real complicated.
we can go to 11 at Oklahoma and Cleveland County, and then have 1 at large with the governor's appointment. Because the county's not represented in this.
Well, the county's not represented in that particular, from a governmental standpoint, but citizens within your county jurisdiction are fully represented by the municipalities involved. I mean, there's options.
Yeah.
Nobody said it's set in stone. But we're trying to keep it as simple as possible to start with, to make sure representation was fair as possible, and to come up with a
The
solution.
the legislation I know that's being proposed out of the Capitol for a city-county regional transit authority and everything, it's, I mean, it's listed as a city-county, be able to create the trust as with the city-county and everything, so they have a regional trust that could be created, so they would be able to have the vote as one vote as a region that we do and everything, and that there would be a trust that would be, I mean, there has to be an entity
Right.
that this is, and that's the legislation that's being presented right now.
But it's
so.
not limited to a city or county boundary in total. It can be independent of that.
And it allows any combination of
Any
cities,
counties,
counties, or
right.
counties. It doesn't have to be all of them. It can
So
be a
there's,
combination.
the legislation that passed will allow for this. And anyway, from our standpoint in the governance committee, subcommittee, we really just wanted to make sure that everybody was fairly represented as much as possible. And that all the communities had a voice, that all the communities within that boundary, which is determined, would have a voice in appointing the trustees. We didn't get into anything further related to that. I mean, there's a lot of details you'd have to work out with the actual appointments, staggering the appointments, so forth and so on, to keep it going the right way. But as far as the number, 9 is kind of the recommendation we came up with.
There is an asterisk also, if you look at the sheet on the left where it lists the largest populations within each sub-district, you'll notice that sub-district 7 is more. If you go back to that map, I was just going to refer to it. Moore was the only sub-district where Oklahoma City, the way it was drawn, still had the majority. And for that particular sub-district, Moore was the governing body that appoints that representative, is the way this was arranged, just to allow Moore to have that ability just with that variance. So there's a little asterisk there on the way that was done.
But all that is a first run at trying to come up with a fair way to do it. There's lots of time to determine what we want to do and how we want to do it. But I think it's important to get at least an initial model on the table, and then if we need to work with that and tweak it, we can do that. There's not
And I think that one of the political realities will be that through some polling, you will know which parts of this district are interested in being a part of it. And so if there are parts of the city that aren't interested, they'd be carved out of the district for political reasons and for fairness reasons. You don't want to force a group of people to be a part of something they don't want to be a part of. And so at that point, all of these boundaries are going to probably need to be redrawn and rethought out, and the city participation have to be read out. But I think this is just kind of a model for what it could look like. But I think that the more questions we get at this level, the better.
Sure.
Because these questions are going to be asked at some point, and the more we've rehearsed our answers, or at least had a chance to think it through.
One of the things that came up too that some of you may be quite thinking is that, as Tom said earlier, precincts change, and so you could have a thought, well, when the precinct changes, then we have to start new businesses that weren't being taxed before, they have to start being taxed. Well, the idea was that the original boundary that you determined for your initial vote, once it passes, it becomes a permanent boundary. And so essentially, once you've voted, you really don't need to vote again if you pass it. And so if the precincts change, that doesn't change your district. The only time you would change your district in the future is if you decided to bring in a new member or a new, bring in a new area, and then you could have a vote to add that.
So the district under consideration for adding would vote within themselves, or would it be, they'd vote to add themselves if approved by the board?
I don't know if anybody knows how that would.
Yeah, we don't only.
And then I guess the other question
You
would
could
be,
make a case that it would be that way.
could an area vote to leave the district, is the other half of that question.
I would think you would have a district-wide vote, not by sub-district. And I suspect that, contrary to what Marion says, I think under all of the redistricting case law that's been developed, that you'd have some obligation to redraw the sub-district lines on a decennial basis when the census is done.
I don't think so, because it would be a subdivision unto itself at that point. So just like, you know, the city of Edmond, which has some precincts that are partially in unincorporated area and some that are within the city, that's, you know, but it would become its own subdivision. That could stay, because it would be kind of a nightmare also to
The
try to.
question would really be is if a particular precinct changes its boundary, which is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Because would that automatically become part, since that precinct's part of the transit authority boundary, would the expanded portion of that precinct automatically become part of it, or do they have a right to vote?
I think we're using the precincts to come up with a way to do the initial vote. After that, then it's an arbitrary subdivision that is the authority itself, and it has its own boundary.
And the RTA boundary would not change.
Would not change.
It would not
It
change,
would not change.
regardless. Yeah.
So I think you might be subject to a challenge at some point if a particular area has grown considerably, that somebody's gonna say, we're not equally represented. And I think that you would be subject to a court challenge on one person, one vote.
There's probably a lot of.
We ought to get a legal.
Sure. And I would think that there's a lot of examples around, whether it be the Dallas, Denver, or that can give us some history of how they've handled that particular situation related to these changes in precinct.
Yeah, but I think the problem is at the fringes.
Sure it is.
I'm not a precinct expert, but it seems to me logically precincts tend to shrink over time because they have a set amount of population in them, right? So there'd be portions of developed population that would be sliding to a new district over time within the core, but they're probably still in the district, in the RTA. It's in the outside.
I'm not talking about changing the set boundaries of the RTA. I'm talking about the sub-districts, and you've got an issue
Yeah,
of
so
one
it's just
person, one vote.
So it's just the representation
Right.
issue.
Oh, in the sub-districts, right.
Mayor, does it impact it at all that they don't actually vote with their appointed positions?
Again, this is, I think, you want to have a legal opinion, have some legal research done on this.
I have no idea.
You don't want to get into it. I mean, even with that, this process, which I think makes a lot of sense, the appointment process, you know, if you have a community within District 9, I'll take on my good friend Jack here. I mean, if you have very different growth rates, there are going to be people who, within that, who may or may want to have a say, especially if they get to that, even to that 20% threshold where, you know, if they're not in the plan where they get to review who you nominate. So, I mean, I just think that there are some details at the sub-district level that would warrant some legal research.
And there's no question that the sub-district population percentages would change every 10 years, because when you do a new census, those are all going to switch again.
Yeah, the lines on the map don't move, so it's just the population changes within that,
Sure.
within those lines. So it'd be pretty quick to determine representation based on the new population number for those districts.
Tom, that is a really interesting question there, because it looks like that these districts were set specifically to make sure that areas like Yukon and Del City went over that 20% threshold that would give them an opportunity to vet the appointee. And so,
That was not intentional, that's just the way it turned out.
oh,
But the
In that
other
case, there's-
consequence of that is that will change, in 10 years, that can change.
that would change, yeah.
Either plus or minus.
You said it was intentional?
No, it wasn't intentional. It just happened to work out that way. The interesting thing about that was the original population numbers and percentages that we looked at in RTD1 were before the last census. So all those numbers did change. When we redid it after the 2010 census, all of a sudden, the percentages were different. Some of them moved up to the point where they did have a say so, but it wasn't intended.
Well, that's good to know, because, yeah, if it was intended,
It
we
was-
wouldn't necessarily hold on to
The
it.
original structure was based upon just trying to keep the population of each district as close to the same as possible, so that there's equal representation per trustee for each district, as far as number of people that are represented. Same way you draw lines to try and make sure all your congressional districts, try to have that same amount of population as close as possible, or your state districts or Senate districts.
Brian, in the other examples of cities I've looked at, almost every one of the rail or BRT was phased in. Were your models expecting the phased in of those?
Yeah, it put like half the BRT and half the commuter rail in by 2021. So we'd almost start construction right after the tax was implemented. And then it was, I think I went to streetcar in the mid-20s and then more commuter rail and BRT in the late 20s, early 30s. And that, obviously that's just normal development of a system more than anything else.
Well,
That's a total.
That sounds like a fairly, aggressive timetable.
Absolutely.
But at what point on your aggressive timetable do you reach downtown Edmond and Main Street North with commuter rail?
Yeah, I don't know that I have an answer to that, because it was really done. I mean, I don't know where that 15 miles of commuter rail is. I mean, I think you would base that decision on, obviously, ridership and a lot of things that we're doing in the evaluation of the study on whether or not Norman happened first or Edmond happened first.
I think politically you can't just go in one direction. You're going to completely.
Yeah, but if we go in both directions, then we're only doing Oklahoma City to start.
Well, but I guess that's my point here.
Right.
I guess, so if I'm trying to sell this to a Norman voter or an Edmond voter, and I'm phasing it, those people are going to be taxing themselves with some point in the date when they get a result. And I'm trying to figure out
Right.
what that commitment for them is. Because I mean, we've seen that in Dallas, where
Right, that happens
areas are
everywhere.
just now getting it, some 30 years, I guess.
Yeah, if you talk to Irving.
Yeah, after they've been paying into it.
Yeah.
So-
I think that, I mean, I guess there's some benefit to, I mean, you would get pretty aggressive bus service right away. So you're getting some services before maybe the fixed guideway gets there.
Okay.
The
So-
40% bus service
It's
increase.
designed to get at that.
How soon, when is that in?
That
how
could
much-
happen immediately.
Right.
As soon as you get it takes a year to get a bus. So as soon as you get your buses in play, you could do some pretty aggressive express bus services to those suburban areas, those types of things, and they'd be getting service. But you're right,
I
that
would
big
just think
ticket.
politically, I mean, obviously a half cent's easier to pass than 3/4 cent. But if I have to choose between that increment or 2025 and 2035, I'll take the 10-year, bonus
The
there.
10-year
to
plan.
get them something sooner,
Right.
to get them to pass it, because, especially when you're relying on a voter pool that, may average 60, 65, and to ask them to, fund this, and in 10 years, you're gonna have rail.
Are you saying that most of us don't want to wait? Is that the way you want to use it?
Some of us have to call our cryogenic doctor and start freeze me and call me out, it's ready.
I think that's a really good point there, but it may actually sort of go back to something Blair said, maybe you start bigger and then with a roll-off, so that you jumpstart the capital improvements on the front end.
And we can
With
look
the
at that.
expectation that you kind of, maybe you go 3/4 and roll back to a half penny within 10 years in order to
Right.
get
Yeah.
that.
That might have some.
You could start, we're very comfortable with the penny here, and it would be really simple to do that and then say it provides the half penny permanent base.
I think that's a very real issue, and I think that's something we need to think about pretty strategically.
Voters like sunset in their taxes.
Since you went back to the financing
They do.
question,
I also think
I
that once you
realized
get
I
it,
did
you'll
have a
never
finance
sunset it.
question, if I could ask this.
Sure.
When you talk about sort of taking the cities off of
Uh-huh.
the obligation, Are you also taking the University of Oklahoma off the obligation on the card?
Well, I did in this, but I would think that if you'd want to maintain service the way it's supplied now, and I'm pretty sure the students ride free. You know, they just show an ID or whatever, get on the service. You would want something from the university based on fare.
I mean, I think that's a very important point, because compared to, say, Edmond or Oklahoma City, the city of Norman pays a very small share of
Right.
that. I mean, the really big player in that bus system is the university, and so.
Our university is not the biggest player, but they do bring.
But you guys were at, what, about 15, didn't you pick up about 15% of the, or 20%?
It's $1.7 million, and Chip, you guys are, your old employer, Chip now works for Edmond, but they're doing about 200 and some.
I'm sure it's total is only about 7%.
I think the other advantage, though, of rolling out a 40% expanded bus service is also going to be augmented beyond that on the early end by simply matching up some routes. There could be some tremendous efficiencies if we've got, you know, Edmond not stopping 1 mile east or west of where Oklahoma City stops, and now you can just ride one bus. So I think that efficiency could really be beneficial for the citizens in short order, just by simply working out our routes. So now they could get on at Edmond right all the way down to OU.
It would seem on all of those university systems that going towards something where they, you know, maybe they continue to ride free with the student ID, but then they reimburse based on their previous budgeted amount, whatever that fare would be. That seems fixable, and I think in the long run, different universities would be pretty clever in figuring out ways to put it in their fees. They just
Well,
plug it out.
that's where it goes.
Well, I think the fees up.
Yeah, we talked about that before, that the sales idea in the public is that, you know, rail lines only go in a few places, but bus will hopefully effectively service a large area and have a lot of support. And I think I mentioned this once before, that when you go back and look at the DART historical timeline, once they passed DART and started collecting money, you look at what was expended over those first few years, the first thing you see is big expansion of the bus system, which occurs, and everybody sees that. And that's an important thing to keep in mind.
And that goes to all the contributing entities. Just isn't sexy enough.
That's true.
Well, any other questions? Comments? Let's talk about what's next. I don't know exactly who to turn to for that.
Well,
Talking about a June,
well, just what, I mean, is it amenable to the committee to schedule something in the late May, early June timeframe? And we could make it for as long as you want. You could come and go as you please. It doesn't even necessarily have to be a committee meeting necessarily, but to give all the members of the committee ample opportunity to look at the evaluation, understand all the different things that we've done and looked at with these corridors, so that you all feel like you're making an informed decision in June. Is that something you want?
I would say I think we need to, because when this conversation goes on, I mean, we're sitting here, city members, thinking, this is a pretty big thing for us to keep moving forward to. If we don't do this in May, then we're not gonna be able to be anywhere until next September or October by the time we hear it in June. So I would like to see us find time. And you might do it, I suppose you could package it, we're gonna do the North Corridor next time.
In April, but we could repeat some of that information at the workshop. And you're right, I mean, we could ratchet it so that
I mean, if you
north
wanted
is
to hear
first
the
hour.
south,
Yeah, we could do that, sure. You could schedule your arrival based on that,
This time is always.
right? That's something, that's how we could tailor it.
well, what about presentations to our individual city councils? That's something that needs to take place.
That's certainly up to you all. We can try to do something like that. Our team is here. We have dates, right? We know when our consultant teams are in town, we can maybe do some of these little, yeah, we can figure that out and send that out to you and see if it matches up to your meetings, something like that.
Yeah, I would say either that or, we kind of collectively cancel one of our council meetings and agree that that week we're all meeting at this larger meeting, where a larger group gets to hear it. I mean, there's two ways of doing it.
Mm-hmm.
If you get them all together, that'd be great.
Yeah, so like an open house type format somewhere larger, obviously, where we can, and it's just important to us that everyone has a chance to ask the questions they want to ask.
Yeah.
Mayor Rosenthal brought up a point about the legislation too.
I mean, wouldn't it be appropriate to wait until we have that secured in the legislation?
Where is it? What's its timeframe?
Because if we don't have a vehicle to do it, I mean,
The last I heard was it passed unanimously out of Representative Joyner's, the Transportation Committee. So that was a week or so ago. It passed unanimously without any questions.
I think it is important to get that passed before we bring all of our councils together, because we'd like to know we have a documented framework to work from.
Another possibility, we have regular workshops that we typically schedule the 2 hours before a council meeting. And I think the advantage of possibly presenting it to smaller groups at a time is that they may feel, those councils may feel that more able to ask their questions, and rather than trying to bring every council together at one time in a larger meeting. I know that's more work, of course, for you guys, but, and we can post it as a workshop, so it's a properly posted meeting.
But I think it's a great idea, and we need to start thinking about it, and I understand we need the legislation, but again, timing is so tedious to get all the city councils together at once.
Yeah, I agree.
Plus it personal.
It was an idea, it wasn't a good one.
But I think it would personalize it to the councils, because Victoria and I are here, and we try to keep our colleagues up to date on this, but it's really difficult to take all of this and get it before we do it.
What does that presentation entail? Are you thinking just the corridors or some of this governance discussion? Because we really are kind of talking about two projects at this point. What's more important to bring to their attention?
I would say
Both.
governance to that audience.
And the boundaries.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's part of the governance discussion anyway.
Yeah, I mean,
They're the ones that are gonna lead the charge when we try to get something passed,
No doubt.
because they are the elected people.
And they're gonna have buy-in to whatever structure is
Absolutely.
gonna be talked about. If they don't have the buy-in, then you're not gonna get it solved.
I think before we do that, what Mayor Rosenthal brought up about vetting what we would be presenting to them to see if there are any issues on those subdivisions as the precincts change. And if there are challenges, can we overcome that? And that could probably be done pretty quickly. John could do that. Where'd that? Oh, okay.
So we'll just sign it.
We'll assign John.
There has to be some history with places like Denver and Dallas and other places that have already had to deal with boundary issues and how that was handled. Whether it was initially handled within the way the authority was designed and written initially, or whether they had subsequent issues to deal with. Either way, we should be able to get some information from them.
and the other group that I would think would need some education is their respective chambers. They're gonna need to understand it, be able to defend it or promote it. So,
Because if they want to promote it, that's the group you want to go to be able to find the resources to really launch any kind of campaign to support it.
And they've been in at least the greater OKC's been on the committee.
that's right, Derek. here
Norman.
today.
Norman's involved, it's on here.
Yeah, it's, you know, they've had a staff person. That's not, you
Okay.
know, a member of the board. Yeah. Yeah, they haven't been shut out. They haven't been engaged either, I would say.
Not to the extent they need to be.
Yeah. So, how do we communicate to our councils, and so is that something we have you guys come do? And that's, I mean, that's
Oh, we
an
need to-
extensive amount of presentation work.
I need to talk to Holly about that, but we could come up with something,
Okay.
you know, at least.
Well,
You know.
and the staff can also develop a presentation and have work there. I mean, I think many of us are willing probably to take the lead in presenting it to our councils. I mean, it's just, you know, having the background materials and the slide presentation, you know, if ACOG can do that, I think some of us can take it back to our own communities and present it without too much difficulty calling on other people who serve on this committee.
And some of us might even be able to take it to some of the other communities. Speak for myself, she said.
You're a majority of one on that vote.
There was crickets chirping after that.
Or not.
Okay, so it sounds to me like what I'm hearing is we want to wait until the state legislation is in place, and then we need to expand the communication to our chambers and to our councils.
Yes.
And we're kind of continuing to discuss with the ACOG staff and the consultants about how that presentation takes place.
Yeah, you know, we might want to get a little bit more detail about costs and, you know, those types of things. And so, you know, maybe that's something, you know, right after your June 25th meeting that you start doing a little road show of some sort.
Well, we've got sunsets occurring at various times for a lot of various taxes in our communities, and so time is of the essence, so they can start kind of thinking, and it's gonna be a waiting game about, you know, new performing arts studio, theater or rail. Ultimately, they're gonna have to make those decisions. So the sooner we can start talking to them about it, the better, I think.
Okay. Everybody had enough for today? All right, let's adjourn.
Yeah.